Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Two Old Sexperts. I'm one of your hosts, Shawn McGill, joined by my dear friend and colleague, Sharon Potter. Today, we take a little bit of a spinoff and we talk with you about merging the idea of positive approaches and how we support people who have problematic sexual behaviors. I think we sometimes struggle to come up with topics. It's hard because we don't want to keep repeating ourselves. And
Right.
we're known for talking to people about sex and sexuality and that sort of thing, but that's not all we do. I mean, that's not all of it. It's a
Right.
part of it. And I think the thing that's been burning me the most, and maybe that's your dream, was a sort of premonition to talking about this today, is that we continually fail people in the system. We've talked about prevention, and I'm getting overloaded and burnt out by how many times we're working backwards when
Yep.
there's a huge problem. And I look at things and I say, my God, there's so much we could have done differently.
Yep.
Why is it that we aren't doing things? And I don't have an answer, because that's the system
Right.
sort of trickling down. But how do we take people really understanding what positive approaches is, and decide, Gila Gary and the work that was done all those years ago on positive practices and approaches, and then all the work that you did with safer options and,
Yeah.
Jim Hoven's work, and how do we take and help people understand what those two things mean individually, but how critical it is to marry and use those things
Yep.
simultaneously to, one, prevent problems, but to help people recover through the system.
Yep. And as we've said before, safer options was, looking at people who had offended or had problematic sexual behavior and how can we support them and, help them to, have the best life that they can possibly have and not reoffend. But as we've said so often, isn't it too bad that we didn't do stuff up front so that didn't happen in the first place? And that's really, I think, what we're still talking about.
We're
I mean,
still talking about it.
it's very difficult. I mean, I look at, the kind of support and supervision people get, and it's, like line of vision. What is it? Line of vision. That's, what I mean.
Line of sight.
Line of sight. Yeah.
Or
Where you can,
what is the other one they say? Within visual proximity, they use that one.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. All those terms, but is that the person forever? Is that who they are forever? Or are there way, and of course not, because people can move from less and less supervision, but there's not enough of that for sure. And somebody, I mean, how many times have we gotten calls saying we need some help here? Somebody's doing something for no reason. Well, of course there's a reason. Dig deeper, sit down with the person, go through their file or their record and see if there's some hint there. Talk to family members, try to find out why they're behaving the way they are. And I mean, I always think of the young man that they asked me to come in because he was beating people up for no reason. And I'm repeating myself, so I won't go into a lot of detail. But when I met with him, met his record, he'd been sexually molested as a young boy by his stepfather and his uncle. They would take him into the bathroom, take him by his shoulder and take him in the bath, put their hand on his shoulder. And what happened was that several things happened. He had broken someone's wrist about a month before that. But one of it, he came home from work and the staff person named Joe said, he said, I want to take a shower. And Joe said, hurry up, it's time for dinner. And he put his hand on his shoulder, and this young man nailed Joe and broke his nose. But breaking it all down, when I talked to him about his abuse, and it was so obvious to me, and I said, now just think about this. When Joe touched your shoulder, you're even though Joe is a man that you trust, and you're an adult man now too, and Joe's not going to hurt you. But when he touched your shoulder, your body remembered the pain and the fear when you were a little boy. And it just blew it all right open. And, Joe happened to be in the building and he went and got him and said he was sorry. But that was right there. And he'd hurt several people too in 1 month, and nobody saw it. And I was, not that I'm any genius, but I was there like an hour and a half and figured it out. I mean, it just was.
Sharon, after spending the week with you in such a close, intimate way, of course, it was probably the best week I've ever had in my life. But
Oh,
what was clear to me was your level of intuition, though, too.
well,
Your
there's that.
ability just to see a person and literally be able to describe them, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's some magical power. I truthfully, I don't. Or is that we just can't be still enough? We can't be quiet enough to observe people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some people have it and, some people don't. It's just, I think about that often, that sometimes I see a person and I can tell if they're in pain. You just kind of know it, and it could be a total stranger, but just the way they're looking or moving, you can kind of tell. And, somebody else might say, oh, move along there, buddy. But I mean, it's a nice thing to have because people, and because I'm older, I think also people don't feel threatened by me, and they tend to open up and share things with me, and I'll stick with them and help them through it. I mean, I don't care if it's somebody that we're supporting within the system. Could be somebody on the street that's having a problem. They're crying. I mean, you just don't walk by somebody like that. You find out what's wrong and can I help? And if you can, you do. But the people that we support, I agree. And I don't know if it means figuring out how to do another kind of statewide training, because there are people who want to do more, I think, want to learn more, and we need the people we're supporting to be part of the training also. I think
We
that's
do. I think
really,
that's important. And I
really important.
it's important for us to kind of take a look at how we institutionalize people. We use sort of institutionalized language with
Yeah,
people too. And so understand that when you use the term like campus, and I'm thinking of young because the whole young person situation is very fresh in my brain right now. But a lot of the juveniles who've been in RTFs or other placements, even psychiatric hospitals, they call it campus, right?
yeah,
And they get used to that language, and then they start calling group homes a campus. But if
yeah,
you keep using language like that, we're institutionalizing people,
right,
telling them you're nothing but the mental health system. Really, that's what it is.
yeah,
And that's what you are. But we do stuff like that too, just even using, the language of deviance. You're looking at someone in a deviant way, or you're
yeah,
use that inappropriate, you're being inappropriate. And I'm
I
going,
know.
well, like, what does that mean? But how is that also sort of holding people just kind of stuck in the mud, and they can't lift their leg and move forward then?
Right. Yeah, I've mentioned it before, but I just, it was such a lesson for me to work with on the sex offender unit at Camp Hill, because I really, really got to understand that a person is not what they did. I mean, they committed something, but that's not who they are. And helping people to find their strength and that their value. I mean, someone that says, I did something wrong, does that make me bad, as you mentioned? No,
Mm-hmm.
what you did wasn't okay, but how are you doing now, or what can I help you with now? I remember working with he actually came and spoke to a group, one of the Safer Options groups, I believe. He was a man who lived in Philadelphia, a professional man, and he had served time for pedophilia. And he was, as you know, there's all different kinds of sex offenders. He was a fixated pedophile. He was a certain group of kids he was attracted to, and a gender, and he made some mistakes, and he went to jail, and he got his crap together. And he said if he was in a restaurant and someone came in that he was feeling an attraction to, he just left, and but it was in his control, and he
Yes.
learned to do that. And I remember some of the people there they were horrified that I asked this man to speak because he was a sex offender. I mean, what did anybody learn anything from him? Of course they did, and
Yeah, but like, and it's also, just the label of offender, which you break the
exactly
law, you're an offender. So if you
right.
get a speeding ticket, guess what? You're an offender. I can type anyone's name into the judicial system, and I can see, even if people have had to be at the magistrate for some reason,
Yeah,
a large majority of the population is an offender on some level.
Well,
So
don't type my name in looking for speeding tickets.
you've already confessed your secret shame.
It's been a long time. I've
Okay, all
slowed down. Yeah,
right. But we just, I don't know, we're not allowing people the chance to recover and get out of the system either. And of course I
exactly.
understand registration, and I understand probation and parole. I understand all that, and I'm not fighting that piece. What's driving me to the point of almost insanity is how we take a problem that to me started off initially so innocent and small, and
Hmm.
how it morphed into this giant, and it means a person, whether that's a child or an adult with a disability, being
Yep.
uprooted and taken from their homes and traumatized, right?
Yep.
Being cast into a system where, let's face it, if you have a disability and you've done something sexually offensive
Yeah.
to anyone, whether you're breaking the law or not, you're held captive in a system for a very long time.
Absolutely. And the other thing that, and I always hesitate to say this because we all know that the direct support professionals, and I mean, they're incredible people who care deeply, most of them, and working all kinds of hours and not getting huge amounts of salaries, what have you. But they're people, we're all people, and we're on this range of how we look at things. And some people have experienced abuse themselves, or there's been abuse in their families, and it's hard for them to separate if they haven't processed it. As some of the people we support, we're helping them to process it. But if the staff haven't processed it in their own lives, they're going to be judgmental, even if they're not saying something, just by their attitude toward people that they're supporting. And I worry about that a lot. And I mean, I've done a lot of, as have you, a lot of work with direct support professionals. And, some of them say, I just can't do that work, or, it just brings up my nephew. I think about that. And okay, but, how do you think you can help this person? Do you think it's, by giving them a slanted eye when they say something? Or do you think you say that was a great job? Good for you for handling that the way you did. And that's what we need. And that's what we all need, that
Yeah.
some positive reinforcement.
And we're not
Yeah.
always at our best all the time. I mean, trust me, I'm not
No.
always at my best all the time. We have moments.
Yeah. One of the things that I think about, and again, we both have worked with people who were harming themselves because they were caught masturbating as young kids and scolded or maybe even beaten up. I mean, who knows? Don't ever do that again. That's horrible, whatever. And we've tried to work with them to say this is normal, healthy, and private. And I've recommended David Hinsberger's films, the One for Men, One for Women, Fingertips, and Handmade Love. And sometimes people are horrified. I mean, they see it as pornography, and it's not. I mean, it's uncomfortable. I mean, I don't, I mean, of course it is. It's a human being, an adult person. But the way that he has recorded this is just so amazing to me, because the dialogue is the same. I'm an adult man or woman, and this is what we're going to talk about. And then I'm going to show you, what's okay and what's not. And this is private, and this is an adult body, and what have you. But I can tell you that there were people that were harming themselves that saw that film with a staff person and turned their life around. And, people, because they're uncomfortable with it, they can't set their own stuff aside. They can't get out of their own way and sit down with someone and watch the film. It would be a good introduction, just those two films, because yeah, I mean, I was uncomfortable watching them, but
Yeah, I mean, it really is sort of like an 80s porno flick. I mean,
yeah,
it's uncomfortable, but
it
you know what?
is. Yeah.
So is a colonoscopy and a rectal exam, but we deal with it.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I love that in both films, the person that is, being featured says, if you're uncomfortable with this, just turn it off. So they're very supportive through the whole thing. And I mean, I can't say enough about those films. They really, I think they've helped so many people, but they could be helping so many more if people weren't uncomfortable. I
And there are
mean,
so many, working with you, I think closer, one of the questions came up about making sure we present things in a, I think, non-threatening way. And whether or not what we talk about and what we try to teach people is reserved for therapists and not necessarily direct support professionals. And I think I really want to try to debunk that too. And I think we've stressed this multiple times, but I was sitting at a risk rating today that I drove to Timbuktu to do, and just looking at everything, there were so many layers of it. There was one, positive approaches and understanding that, right? And that's not a therapist, that's sort of a behavior specialist, a team liaison, making sure that you understand that, but you're practicing that. But what also was happening was this person had a significant history of trauma, a
Yep.
lot of abandonment, a lot of loss, terrible self-esteem, no sense of belonging, no sense of love. So there's the trauma piece that's reserved for a therapist. Absolutely.
Yes.
But there
Yeah.
are ways through positive approaches that are trauma sensitive too. And if you respond in a certain way through positive approaches, you've just provided a sense of safety and security for a person where you're going to de-escalate them
Yes.
quickly.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole sexual piece. So
Yep.
what did the person learn? What did they not learn? And more often than not, I'm seeing we're still not talking about it, and people are trying to figure it out on their own. And that's what happened. But you have all these balls sort of in the air, and
In the air.
the only one that we really need a therapist for, if anything, is the trauma piece.
Yes. I mean, I know we both had situations. We worked with people that were inserting things in their rectum, and the one that I so was so poignant for me was a young man who'd been hospitalized 2 or 3 times and for rectal bleeding. And I met with him, read, whatever, and he was very open with me, and he would have a stronger orgasm, was pressure around the prostate. But he was putting things that were harmful in his rectum, spoons and sticks, and terrible. It was awful. So his staff was all male, young, in their 20s, 30s. And there were 3 or 4 of them that were out waiting after I met with this gentleman. And I had his permission to talk to them about what was going on. And I said to them, this is what's happening. They kind of knew what was happening. But I said, do you know that there are items made for this purpose? And they went, yeah. And they were looking at each other like, oh my God, did she actually say that? And I said, is there any reason why nobody's gotten one for him? And they were like mortified. And they said, we didn't know we could. And I said, well, do you know what's going to happen if you don't? And I think they thought I was going to say, you're going to get fired. But I
We're going
said,
to shut you down.
yeah, I said, he's going to die. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So which one of you guys where's the nearest adult store? And which one of you guys wants to come with me and Bobby, or whatever his name was? I just gave him a name. And off we went. And that was the end of it. But he really literally could have died because people were so uncomfortable with what he was doing that nobody could resolve the issue.
No.
And man,
I mean, I think
like,
people love you a little bit more because you have a little more couth, and you are like America's grandmother that everyone just loves you. So, but with me, not so much. I'm one of those, you either love me or you hate me people. There's no in between. And but we're
how
both.
could anybody hate you?
Oh, they do. I heard in a meeting the other day, they said 2 words, Shawn McGill, and that was enough to scare us. I'm like, but I'm really not that scary.
No.
What the common thread is, we're persistent advocates for
Yeah.
things. And I think that's another very important message, is that when you see something and we can be doing better, we should be doing more, then somebody needs to keep trying too.
Yeah.
Even if it does
Absolutely.
mean ruffling feathers, potentially losing your job. Because I think what it comes down to, people are not in this field for the money. But what I've seen is we can give more and more money, and
Yeah.
people are burning out at exponential rates
Yeah.
because we're not supporting them enough, but we're also still supporting people in the same way. And it's getting
Exactly.
nowhere.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm hoping it's going to open up again soon are classes for adults with IDDD autism. I don't think there's anything I love doing more than that. A small group, maybe 10, 12, maybe up to 15 or something, but not a huge big group. And talk about the nitty gritty. And I always open and say by saying there's nothing that you can't ask me or tell me. Now, if you tell me that you've hurt someone in some way, I have to report that, but I will stick with you through the whole thing. If you tell me, I will be with you through that. And people tell me all kinds of things and ask all kinds of questions. And, just a basic thing, what is sex? And people will say, doing it. And I say, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. Because they need to know. They need to know. And what is trust? And how do you know? And what if someone says this? What does that mean? And really getting down to the things that they deal with and don't know how to deal with. And so we need to help them to do that. But I hope that opens up soon and I can get back in a room with some real humans.
Well, and what I hope happens soon is that somehow we break through the threshold of just recording podcasts and we get asked to the tables of the decision makers somewhere. And I
Yeah.
think that's multiple systems, Sharon. It's not just the ID system, but it's the children and youth system. It's the
Yes.
Office of Behavioral Health and Human Services, and
Yeah.
it's
Criminal justice, the criminal justice system.
multiple tables that need to come to a room and develop, I don't know, something. But
Yeah.
I would love to be invited, because the things that you're talking about, those groups for adults, we've talked about sexual consent. We've talked about teaching children as young as preschool age, some even kids with disabilities or special needs, how to do that. We need this to start at a much earlier age, and we need to work with parents and teachers and direct support professionals starting as young as possible into the adult years, but we're not doing that.
Yeah. No, we're not. And I look at what other countries do. Oh my goodness. Like in some of the Scandinavian countries, the year that kids are graduating from high school, there's a class about what your first sexual encounter should be like for you and your partner. Now, I can't even, we do, that's, of course, everybody should be doing that. But can you imagine when we can't even get books in classrooms? I mean, but it's
I'm
just so
surprised we
astounding.
haven't been banned yet.
I know. I have an Australian friend who said, I'm so glad we got the criminals and you got the Puritans. And it's true. Safer Options effort came out of a group just like what you're talking about. It was a cross systems committee, and it was children and youth, and at the time it was MR and MH and corrections. I mean, it was, and we had the Bureau of Autism come in and do a presentation on autism, and the two men from the Department of Corrections said, "Oh my God, have we got these guys or what?" You
You
know,
have like 50%. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that was all building safer options. But here we are. We've really slipped back. And many of those people, there were 80 some people in that training, and we used a train the trainer model. But that was how many years ago? 25?
20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And people have
we're
retired.
kindly being asked to be invited to the tables. Because there's just such an influx of young people, and then they're aging out of like the children and youth system, right, or the RTF system, and then they're moving directly into the IDD adult system, right?
Yep.
It's got, well, wait, like, why don't you
I
go
know.
back to when he was 15 months old, and what happened there? And I mean, there's
Exactly. Yeah. And all that early childhood stuff. I mean, the impact is profound, as you well know, on behaviors, but it's not that hard to get to if you really do some digging and help the person understand.
and if you have that connection, if you really do understand positive approaches, and you can focus on that critical first step of building the rapport, building the relationship, what I found is people will be the greatest historians because they'll talk to you. If you
Yeah,
start asking questions and they're comfortable, they give you the information.
absolutely.
And I'll be 100% correct, but you can clearly develop enough to see a pattern of sorts, or sort of fill in the gaps of a person's life.
Yeah,
And that's sad
absolutely.
to me. We're still Remember the day when biographical timelines, like that was the big buzz. Right now, I think today it's still trauma informed care. Like that's a big buzz. And I had this
Yeah,
conversation with a team today. But what does that really mean? Like we use these terms, right? But what
yeah,
does that really mean? What do you understand about that?
yeah.
How would you use that? And I kind of stumped a whole room full of people just by asking that question.
I'm not surprised. I'm
Don't
really
know.
not.
And it's not
Yeah.
their fault.
Yeah, I used to do, I have it, well, I have it, I still have it, transparency using Erickson's stages of development. And I would overlay that. I had it formatted in a way that I could overlay it on the person's history, or I had it formed for the person's history. And I would overlay it and see what happened in their life at what developmental age. And then talk to them about it. It was like, whoa. And so often they would say, oh my God, I
Shocking,
had,
isn't it?
yeah, it really is. Yeah,
But what's going to be
absolutely.
shocking for listeners is trying to understand what you say by an overlay and understand that we used to have overhead projectors that you could because now, Sharon, we're going to have to create an app for that.
I know. Like when I would dial my phone, dial me up. Oh my God, it's
I know, and now we
crazy.
can't even hang up on people with the right force and power anymore either. It's just really, it's been downhill since the 80s.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know, but I mean, you have to laugh because when you see what happens, and that's another thing, and I don't know, I can't assume, but I think being in the trenches, being in like a direct care staff or doing any one-on-one work with people who are in the system, it's hard. It's hard on you. uh,
Yeah,
because you're getting the firsthand stories. You're living sort of this vicarious trauma with people, and I don't know that the people who need to hear it the most, if they understand it. Like I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt. They're always trying to put out fires and put out the best things, and think it's the best. But like you said, until you really hear from people who've been living it, I don't think they're
yeah,
going to get a true accurate picture.
yeah. No, I agree. A long time ago, I worked in a residential program before I went to Harrisburg, and it was residential and it was a private licensed school. But I used to like to pop into the residential just to see how the kids were doing and spend a little time. And there was a young man who had been restrained earlier in the day, and I went to see him and kind of talk to him, and he had a sneaker print on the side of his face that was part of the restraint. And I was beyond livid. I was, it was just outrageous to me. And when I spoke to the director, I called him at home that night because I stopped in the residential on my way home. It was late. And I said, do you know what happened? And what are you doing about it? And he said, well, we're sending the staff person, we're retraining the staff person. I said, you're retraining him? How about having him arrested? That's outrageous. That's abuse. But like, well, that was a long time ago. That was 40 years ago. But
Yeah, but Sharon, we know that's still happening. You and
it
I
is,
both
yeah.
know that's still happening. And if we really want to go the route of let's talk trauma informed care, why are we still allowing anyone to put their hands on people?
On a kid, yeah.
And that is happening in the schools. I work
Oh,
still
yeah,
with a number of kids, and some reports every day, several times a day. We're
yeah,
still allowing that to happen. And if you really understood trauma informed care, you wouldn't be putting your hands on kids.
yep,
And so what's that
exactly.
teaching them too? Just even
I
restraints.
I remember when we passed some regulations, I guess, about restraint. I was with Pennsylvania Protection and Advocacy. You weren't supposed to restrain anybody. And I happened to be in the Department of Welfare a few days later, weeks later, and I got a phone call from one of the staff that I, supervised, and she was at one of the state hospitals, and she said, aren't there some new regulations around restraint?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "There's someone here in 4-point restraint right now." So I left my meeting. I went down to the Department of Mental Health, and it was Charlie Curie was the secretary and the Office of Mental Health. And the secretary said, he's in a meeting. I said, is he here? And she said, he's in a meeting. And I said, well, that's too bad. And I opened the door and walked into the meeting and said, Charlie, you know about the restraint, no more restraints. And he said, yeah, yeah. I'm kind of surprised. But he said, yeah. And I said, there's someone right now and I told him the hospital, it was Danville State Hospital, in 4-point restraint. And he looked at the man with him, who was the medical doctor, and said, is this possible? And he said, it's possible. Yeah, they're hatching it down. And Charlie just said, fix it. And I left. And about a year later, he was retiring, and I went to his retirement party, and people were, saying things, and he got up to talk, and he did. And then he said, I know how most of us feel about the advocates. They're always out to get us. And he said, but let me tell you what one advocate did. And he told everybody there that I burst in. I mean, it wasn't all that dramatic. He made it sound like burst into his office in a meeting. He made a point of saying, we're all in this together, is really what he was saying. And I mean, that was quite something. I was taken back by that. But people, they're human beings, and it's a huge system. And the actual structure is just, it's like molasses. It takes such a long time to get things done. And, who supervises who and what do they know? And it's a very complicated system, but the people that we're supporting are being hurt because we're not all on the same page.
And that's exactly right. And you know what? Sometimes we do need to light some pants on fire.
Yeah,
Because if your pants lit on fire, then you're going to move a little bit too. And
true.
it's sad because I'm looking at situations a little bit closer. I'm doing less sitting behind a desk now and just back since, with COVID, it's nice to be back with people, but it's also exhausting to
Yeah.
see the things that you're seeing again on like firsthand basis. Like it's right in your face. I don't even know where I was going with this. I'm losing my train of thought.
Well, I can't imagine why. You never stop. You never stop. Well, it's funny because I think there's actually two reasons. One is aging, which is, of course, my end of the spectrum. And the other literally is because you have so much going on that, your brain just can't hold on to everything. And of course, you have nothing going on there at all.
Do you know what
You know,
though? I'm starting to learn, and I should censor myself to not give a flying you know what anymore.
yeah,
And when I say that, it's not about the people. I think that I'm back to the highest drive for caring for the people that I've ever had. I'm not giving a flying F about who I offend anymore when it comes to trying to get the right thing done.
right.
Again, I'll try to be as kind, as respectful, as sensitive as possible. But if I need to persist and you're going to say I'm an asshole because of it, I'm okay
Yeah,
with that.
I totally get that. You are the least rude person I think I've ever met, and I try not to be rude to people either. But there's a point where somebody has to stand up for what's right. I mean, it just doesn't. If we're not part of the solution, as who said that, Kennedy, I guess, we're part of the problem. And I don't want to be part of the problem. I really don't.
And that's important because you and I spend so much time just talking about things and watching, movies and talking more. And I think we're at a crossroads in our country, across the world.
Yeah.
People have been fighting for basic human rights for so long.
Yeah.
Women, African Americans, you name
Yeah.
it. People with
Absolutely.
disabilities, the LBGT pop, and transgender people separate. It's been for hundreds of years. People have been fighting for basic human rights. I'm getting tired of it.
Yeah.
I'm getting tired of it because I don't know why we still have to be having these conversations.
Yeah. It is really crazy. And of course, I remember the time where I couldn't get a checking account without, either my husband or my father's permission, and within my lifetime. But it's just, and I look at my grandkids, especially my granddaughters, because it was women who were always kind of, oh, you shouldn't do that, you can't do that, or that's not for you, or whatever. But they are strong, and they're tough cookies, and they're kind, and they're smart, and it's a joy just to see how they're functioning in the world. But the people we support, there they are dependent. Many of them are dependent on us, not as dependent as they need to be, but nevertheless dependent. And I think that's what we reinforce is the dependency. Not what do you want to do and how can we help you to do that? Or how can we help you to be who you want to be? It's you should do this and you should do that. And I mean, there are some things you can't do, and we know that, but we'll help people through that. But how often do we ask people, what do you want to do with your life? Who do you, never mind what's happened in the past. If you could start today, what would you do? And I think the answers would be surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah, we're still not there. I mean, as
No,
long as people have to say, well, why can't I go here? We're not there.
no, we're not. I'm thinking of my friend Ray, who had quite a speech. He had cerebral palsy, and we did a lot of work together, and we had many dinners together. And almost every time, the wait person would come over, and they'd ask me what I wanted, and they'd say, "What does he want?"
Oh my God.
Yeah, countless times. And I mean, I could interpret for him because we were such good friends. I totally understood his language. But he would just look, he'd just give them an evil eye, he would just stare at them. I'd say, well, maybe you should ask him. And then he would say it. And if they didn't understand it, I would say what it was. But just assuming a person isn't capable or doesn't care or because they don't speak that they don't know. That's
Maybe
ridiculous.
that's it, Sharon. Maybe that's the most frustrating thing is just, and maybe that's still the problem. We still aren't presuming the intellect of people.
Yeah.
We're still stuck on the labels. And I hear people repeating that, that I
Mm-hmm.
work with in the system. Well, I have special needs, and I even hear them say, well, that person is low functioning. So I'm
I
going,
know.
you know, just stop, because
Yeah.
that's also part of the problem. We assume that people don't know better, or they can't learn, or they can't understand, so we're just not teaching them.
Yeah. It makes no sense at all. Just when I was with you last week, just meeting the young person one of the young people that you support, and he's brilliant. You could just see it. You could just see it in him. But he's pretty nonverbal. But you could look at him and know how smart he was. He just kind of twinkled. And then I think somebody started singing at one point, and
I
he
started to
burst into
say,
song. Was it
yes,
you?
yes,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
yeah. That was very, very cool. People just they don't imagine beyond what they see. Don't understand that there's below the surface, there's so much more. With what you're seeing on the surface is not who the person is for all of us, really.
All of us. Because someone said to me, I was talking about our week together, and they said, well, Sharon still drives? I said, Sharon
Yeah,
would drive across the country probably still. Are you kidding me?
I did that twice and camped while I was at it and walked a piece. I was laughing about that. I was 4 days on the Appalachian Trail by myself, and I just happened to. I have a friend whose son tested positive for Lyme's disease. He found a tick on his neck, and he's a woodsy guy. But anyway, I said, well, when I hike the Appalachian Trail, I put flea collars on my ankles. I
I
mean, it
remember
made
you telling
sense
me
to
that.
me.
Yes.
Like, why wouldn't you do that?
But see, that's the answer, Sharon. You have really good practical common sense still.
Yeah.
I did used to joke too, because I was a positive approaches trainer for so many years. And I'd walk in, it was like an all day training. I said, okay, so my job today is to teach you, one, to have common sense, and two, don't be a douchebag, be a decent human being.
Yes, please
And
don't do that.
so I'm going to spend a lot of time just talking to you about those two things. And
Yeah.
it was sort of lighthearted, and but we were able to kind of break down the core pieces of information,
Yeah.
go there, and kind of going back to looping full circle on where we started talking. People still just don't understand it. But what's sort of made our careers over the years is the ability to not just talk about the hard things and answer some of those questions and guide people through the really challenging things. It's been using what positive approaches really is,
Yes.
putting those two things together. So there's a lot more than just talking about sex.
Right.
There's a lot more to it. And we're trying to give people tidbits of information and advice. So maybe a piece will be doing some positive approaches stuff too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good, but it's not enough. I think that's what it's part of the solution, but there's so much more. People have to dig deeper and dig deeper into the person we're supporting to find out what the issues are, but also into ourselves so we can figure out what is the gap here? Why aren't we connecting? And once people do that, I mean, I worked with staff that were having a really hard time with words and body parts and functions but once they got past that, they were terrific. They were just terrific and really helped people,
Yeah.
so.
So step number one, system, quit trying to be so politically correct all the time too. Because
Yeah,
it's
it doesn't work
perfect.
anymore.
And the highlight of my day was sitting in a room full of professionals. And at the end, when they said, "So what do you think he needs?" And I looked at them, I said, "You want me to answer that honestly?" And they said, "Yes." So I said, "A pocket pussy." I said it.
Yes, well.
And the woman across from me said, "A pocket pussy." That's what I was thinking. She said, but there was no way I was going to say it.
That's right.
And I said,
Yeah.
"Well, that's what I'm here for."
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I had a situation not exactly like that, but this young woman, she needed to have a vibrator, and her parents said, absolutely not. We're Christians or whatever they were. I don't know, but that's no, absolutely not. She can't. So what she did was she got an electric toothbrush, and that didn't have a good end. It didn't, I mean, no pun intended there, but she got an infection, and that wasn't good. And, so I sat down with them and said, I understand where you're coming from, but this is a young woman, a young sexual woman. She doesn't have a partner. And, there's nothing wrong with doing what she's doing. It releases, endorphins and whatever. And it's private and, what have you. And they just said, whatever, they were not happy, but, she was, but we got her a vibrator, like, no, she can't. So, okay, let her hurt herself. Like, what? How many people are doing that? I wonder.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. Stay tuned for new episodes coming soon.